When you think of Tombstone, you picture mean gunfights, unforgettable lines, and of course, Sam Elliott's famous mustache stealing every scene. But here's the twist. Elliott recently told us a behind-the-scenes truth that most fans of this legendary Western movie never knew about. It's the kind of detail that changes how you see the movie. And once you know it, you can't unsee it. So, what exactly did Sam Elliott tell us about Tombstone that left fans shocked after all these years? Stick around because this big secret might just change the way you watch the film forever. What was Tombstone really about? When you think of Tombstone, you're not just thinking of a cowboy movie. You're thinking of fights, gunsmoke, and one of the most unforgettable groups of actors ever put on screen. It came out in 1993, and this wasn't just another cowboy movie. It was George P. Cosmatos' dream brought to life after writer Kevin Jarre, the film's first director, was replaced early on. And the cast was absolutely amazing. Kurt Russell played Wyatt Earp with strength and determination, while Val Kilmer turned Doc Holliday into a scene-stealing legend of movies. But the greatness didn't stop there. Sam Elliott played Virgil Earp with a powerful presence that felt like it was carved from stone. Bill Paxton gave Morgan Earp a sad weakness that made his death hurt even more. Powers Booth was pure evil as Curly Bill, the kind of bad guy who made the air feel different when he walked into a scene. Then came Michael Biehn's scary performance as Johnny Ringo, acting that made craziness look beautiful. Dana Delaney brought fire and passion to Josephine Marcus, shaking up the story in all the right ways. And to top it all off, the storytelling voice came from Robert Mitchum himself, a legend giving his voice to a legend. Together, this wasn't just a film. Tombstone was a big event set against the bloody background of the 1880s in southeast Arizona. The story is taken straight from real history. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral and the Earp Vendetta ride. Critics loved its directing and wonderful acting, with Kilmer's hard-drinking, sharp-tongued Doc Holliday stealing nearly every scene. The result, a $73.2 million box office hit that became a cult classic. And here's the kicker. Decades later, fans still can't stop quoting it. But if you think you know Tombstone inside and out, think again. Because behind all the famous lines, gun battles, and cool stares, there are stories that even superfans probably haven't heard. Kevin Jarre's firing. Tombstone isn't just a Western. It's one of the most beloved, endlessly rewatchable films of modern times. And let's be honest, if you're a fan, you've probably quoted half the movie by heart, especially Val Kilmer's unforgettable performance as Doc Holliday. His razor-sharp acting mixed with wit and swagger has gone down as the best portrayal of the gambling gunslinger. You might think you know every line, every showdown, every dramatic stare from this film. But here's the twist. There are hidden stories behind Tombstone that most fans have never heard. And once you know them, you'll never look at the movie the same way again. For starters, Tombstone wasn't just packed. It was loaded with one of the most tough guy groups Hollywood ever put together. Kurt Russell as Wyatt Earp, Sam Elliott as the strong and quiet Virgil, Bill Paxton as the doomed Morgan. Powers Booth eating up the screen as Curly Bill. Michael Biehn brings a chilling edge as Johnny Ringo. And that's before you even get to the supporting actors. Michael Rooker, Thomas Hayden Church, Stephen Lang, Billy Zane, Jason Priestley, Billy Bob Thornton, and Terry O'Quinn all left their marks. It was the kind of lineup that made the film feel huge before a single shot was fired. Speaking of shots, the movie was filmed almost entirely on location in Arizona starting in May 1993. Kevin Jarre, the screenwriter behind Glory and Judgment Night, wrote the script based on real people like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, weaving in legendary events such as the gunfight at the OK Corral. Jarre wasn't just the writer, this was supposed to be his first time directing. But that dream quickly fell apart. Overwhelmed by how fast production moved, struggling to capture important shots, and falling further behind schedule, Jarre was fired just 1 month into filming. That shakeup nearly tore the production apart. Michael Biehn, a close friend of Jarre, even thought about quitting. He later admitted that he felt replacement director George P. Cosmatos didn't understand or respect the script. Still, when Cosmatos came in, the cast stuck together. He brought a strict, no-nonsense presence to the set, which created tension, especially with cinematographer William Fraker. Meanwhile, Kurt Russell quietly stepped up, working with producer James Jacks to cut down Jar's huge script, trimming out side stories and focusing more on the friendship between Wyatt and Doc. But here's the kicker. Russell later revealed that it was actually him, not Cosmatos, who directed the film. According to Russell, Cosmatos was brought in as a kind of fake director, a public face, while Russell directed the movie behind the scenes. Val Kilmer backed him up, saying Russell basically directed, though he stopped short of saying Russell handled every actor personally. Bean himself admitted that Russell never gave him direction directly, but the truth is clear. Without Russell steering the ship, Tombstone might never have become the classic it is today. On the advice of Sylvester Stallone, Kurt Russell quietly took control with Cosmatos acting as his on-set cover. Russell cut his own lines, lost hours of sleep, and made the tough calls to keep the production alive. He promised he'd keep the secret until after Cosmatos' death, and he did. In 2013, nearly 10 years after Cosmatos passed away, Russell finally confessed in an honest interview with True West magazine. Cosmatos, for his part, really cared about historical accuracy. Everything from costumes to props to customs was designed to feel real. Even famous moments were built carefully, but Billy Bob Thornton's saloon scene where Wyatt throws him out was almost entirely made up on the spot. Thornton had only one direction: be a bully. The result? A classic sequence that perfectly showed Wyatt's ability to control a room without ever pulling his gun. All the actors grew real mustaches except John Tenney. When you think of Tombstone, you picture the toughness, the gun smoke, and of course those glorious mustaches. But here's the thing. Those mustaches weren't Hollywood fakes. Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, Powers Booth, Jason Priestley, Stephen Lang, and Michael Biehn all committed so hard to their roles that they grew the real deal. No stick-ons, no quick fixes, just pure Old West realness hanging from their lips. Michael Biehn, who brought Johnny Ringo to life with icy meanness, explained where that obsession came from. Kevin Jarre, the film's original director, was really picky about details. He wanted the mustaches not just grown, but styled a very particular way with curled ends polished with wax like men of the 1880s actually wore them. It wasn't just facial hair, it was character work, and the cast took a strange kind of pride in it, wearing their mustaches like a badge of honor. But not everyone got to join the club. John Tenney, who played Sheriff Johnny Behan, came in fresh off another role and couldn't grow one in time. That meant he had to fake it. According to Bean, Tenney carried that like a quiet shame on set, joking that he felt like the small dog of the group because his mustache wasn't real. It's a tiny detail, but one that says everything about Tombstone. Even the whiskers had to be real. And speaking of realness, there's one piece of casting where Tombstone almost looked very different. Willem Dafoe almost played Doc Holliday. It's almost impossible to picture anyone but Val Kilmer delivering that razor-sharp, "I'm your huckleberry," with the perfect mix of charm and meanness. But believe it or not, Kilmer wasn't the studio's first pick. The role of Doc Holliday was originally set aside for Willem Dafoe. Imagine that, Willem Dafoe stepping into the boots of the legendary gunslinger. The role would have gone to Dafoe, but the only problem was Hollywood politics. Universal still had cold feet about Dafoe after The Last Temptation of Christ stirred up controversy 5 years earlier. His role in The Last Temptation of Christ ultimately cost him Tombstone. But the what-ifs don't stop there. Legend has it Mickey Rourke was offered Johnny Ringo, but he said no. No one seems to know exactly why. Was it scheduling conflicts, creative differences, or maybe he just didn't feel it was the role for him? Whatever the reason, the part slipped away. But just picture that for a second. Rourke's smoldering unpredictability facing off against Kilmer's witty, dying Doc. Instead, the role went to Michael Biehn, who delivered a performance that still sends chills. Ironically, Rourke would circle back to the Western genre years later, showing up in Danny Trejo's direct-to-DVD horror Western Dead in Tombstone. This time, not as a gunslinger, but as Lucifer himself. Talk about trading 6 shooters for eternal damnation. And speaking of fire and brimstone, Let's talk about the man who lit up Tombstone in a way no one else could. Val Kilmer stole the show. Doc Holliday wasn't an Earp by blood, but in Tombstone he might as well have been the heartbeat of the story. While Kurt Russell, Sam Elliott, and Bill Paxton carried the weight of the Earp brothers, it was Val Kilmer's Doc who stole every frame, every line, every moment. His acting wasn't just performing, it was channeling. The real Wyatt Earp once described his closest friend as a tall, ash-blonde man, rail-thin, ravaged by tuberculosis, yet unmatched at the gambling table and lightning fast with a gun. Kilmer leaned into that description with obsessive detail. He didn't just memorize lines. He crafted a character dripping with equal parts charm, meanness, and fragility. Holliday's cough wasn't overdone. It was haunting. His accent wasn't generic Southern. It was refined and deliberate, based on careful study of Holliday's Georgian roots. And that quick draw you see on screen, Kilmer drilled it over and over until the timing was perfect. But perfection came at a price. Filming in the Arizona summer was brutal, and Kilmer's heavy wool costumes turned each day into torture. He was sweating through takes, yet he never let it break the performance. Off camera, he studied Holliday's habits, mannerisms, and history, making sure the role was more than a cartoon of a dying gunslinger. The result? A performance so sharp and intense it overshadowed even the leads. Critics didn't just praise Kilmer, they crowned him the soul of Tombstone. Fans still debate if it's the greatest Western performance ever put on film. But here's the kicker. Kilmer later admitted he saw Holliday as both cursed and free. Dying young gave him nothing to lose, which made him the most dangerous man in the room. That subtle edge is why Doc doesn't just support the Earps in the film, he defines them. That subtle edge is why Doc doesn't just support the Earps in the film, he defines them. But here's the wild part. Just like Doc himself, the Tombstone we know today is only half the story. What audiences saw in theaters wasn't the full picture at all. The original cut ran so long it could have been an entirely different movie. Tombstone was meant to be over 3 hours long. When Tombstone hit DVD, fans finally got a taste of extra footage that expanded the world they already loved. But here's the catch. Not everything made it to the final cut. One of the most interesting deleted moments involved the cowboys holding a bonfire, mourning their fallen friends right after the OK Corral burial. The sequence actually shows up in the film's trailer, teasing audiences, yet it vanished from the finished movie. Another casualty of the edit was a longer romance between Wyatt and Josephine. The romance played beautifully on screen, but trimming it down kept the film's relentless pace intact. And while Tombstone premiered in December 1993, it wasn't the only Wyatt Earp project in the works. Warner Brothers released their own version with Kevin Costner, written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan. The verdict: audiences praised Tombstone for its fast pace and sharp historical detail, while Kasdan's film was slammed as bloated and boring. What most people don't realize is that the real Wyatt Earp had already beaten Hollywood to the punch. Years before Russell and Costner ever slipped into his boots, Earp was walking studio lots and trading stories with directors who would turn the Old West into America's favorite myth. The real Wyatt Earp was a Hollywood consultant. The real Wyatt Earp didn't just ride off into the sunset when his days as a lawman were over. He headed straight for Hollywood. By 1915, the aging gunslinger had moved west to Los Angeles, where he carved out an unexpected second act as a consultant for the very industry that would turn his legend into folklore. Earp found himself hanging out with the pioneers of the Western genre, men like John Ford and actor Henry Carey, who were laying the foundation for what would soon become Hollywood's most lasting staple. His stories of Dodge City and the OK Corral weren't just tales. They were first-hand accounts shaping how early filmmakers showed the Old West on screen, and the influence didn't stop there. Earp became a quiet but powerful figure among the up-and-coming cowboy stars. John Wayne later admitted that he met Earp once, and the impression was so strong that he modeled his signature slow, deliberate walk after him. That walk became Wayne's trademark and, by extension, one of the most iconic images of Western cinema. Earp's connections didn't end with Wayne and Ford. He was also friends with silent era stars like William S. Hart and Tom Mix, men who carried the cowboy myth into America's living rooms long before color film. When Earp died in 1929, both Hart and Mix served as pallbearers at his funeral. A final nod to the way the man who lived the West had passed his torch to the men who would immortalize it. The kicker, Wyatt Earp, a man who once stared down outlaws at gunpoint, ended up shaping the way generations of moviegoers imagined the Wild West, not just as a gunslinger, but as Hollywood's first true cowboy consultant. Tombstone is missing a few Earps. The heroic trio at the center of Tombstone, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, felt like the whole story. Kurt Russell's steel-eyed Wyatt, Sam Elliott's gravel-voiced Virgil, and Bill Paxton's boyish yet battle-ready Morgan were the heartbeat of the film. But here's a secret. The real Earp family was much bigger. In fact, there were 9 siblings in total. Beyond the famous brothers stood sisters Martha, Virginia, and Adelia, half-brother Newton, eldest brother James, and the youngest Warren. James, a gambler, saloon keeper, and Union veteran, was actually in Tombstone the day of the OK Corral showdown, though he was reportedly at home eating lunch when bullets started flying. Warren wasn't in town either, but after Morgan's murder, Wyatt deputized him. Warren rode alongside Wyatt, Doc Holliday, and others on the bloody vendetta ride that followed. But for all the family ties and blood loyalty, Wyatt's legend wasn't built on the number of siblings he had. It came from the kind of moments that made people shake their heads and say, "That can't be real." Wyatt Earp really waded into a creek to shoot Curly Bill. While Russell was taking charge of Tombstone behind the camera, history itself gave the film one of its most unbelievable showdowns. The scene where Wyatt Earp wades into a creek to face down Curly Bill feels almost supernatural. Gunfire explodes all around him. Bullets slicing the air, yet not a single one finds its mark. Earp doesn't flinch. He walks straight through the hail of lead before unloading both barrels of his shotgun into Curly Bill, dropping the outlaw where he stood. It plays like something straight out of legend. But here's the truth. It actually happened. In real life, one of Curly Bill's men, Johnny Barnes, survived the ambush long enough to tell the tale. Dying from his wounds in a nearby farmhouse, Barnes described Earp's near-miraculous feat exactly as the film later showed it. A lawman, walking through impossible odds, untouchable until the very end. That moment blurred the line between myth and reality, and it left Wyatt Earp with the kind of reputation you don't just earn, you survive to tell. Doc Holliday actually did say, "You're a daisy if you do." Now, speaking of legends, here's a detail that's too good not to stop on. Doc Holliday really did say, "You're a daisy if you do." That line, delivered by Val Kilmer with that sly, half-dead grin in Tombstone, isn't a Hollywood invention. It's straight from history. Reports from the Tombstone epitaph and other sources confirm Holliday taunted his enemies with those exact words during the OK Corral showdown. But then comes the bigger question. What about the most famous line of them all? "I'm your huckleberry." Did Doc Holliday ever actually say it? Did Kilmer even say it the way we think he did? That debate has raged online for years. According to True West magazine, the phrase first surfaced in Walter Noble Burns' 1928 book, Tombstone, based on interviews with locals who lived through the chaos. In old Southern slang, "I'm your huckleberry" meant, "I'm the right man for the job," or, with more bite, "If it's a fight you're looking for, I'm ready." Given that Holliday was born in Georgia, the line fits him like a tailored suit, dripping with aristocratic bravado. Still, there's a darker interpretation. Some insist Holliday actually said, "I'm your hucklebearer." A huckle was slang for the handles on a coffin, making a hucklebearer a pallbearer. Read that way, the line becomes a death sentence, as if Doc was telling Ringo, "If you're ready to die, I'll be the one to carry you." Here's where it gets juicy. The Tombstone screenplay itself, fourth draft, dated March 15, 1993, spells it out in black and white. It says Huckleberry. No pallbearers, no alternate spellings, just the line that became one of the most iconic mic drops in Western cinema. Doc Holliday and Frédéric Chopin have a sad connection. Doc Holliday doesn't just spit one-liners in Tombstone. He drops words that cut deep, the kind that stick with you long after the gun smoke clears. His lines became more than dialogue. They turned into t-shirts, patches, and memes. proof that even his sharpest throwaway remarks had a kind of outlaw poetry. Take that profanity-laced jab he throws at Billy Clanton, played by Thomas Hayden Church. On the surface, it's just another of Doc's witty insults, but underneath it carries a weight that's easy to miss. The line nods to Frédéric Chopin, the brilliant composer whose sad music Doc plays on the piano. The irony: both men were slowly being eaten alive by the same disease, tuberculosis. That parallel hits hard. Here's Doc Holliday coughing up blood between shootouts, channeling the ghost of a composer who decades earlier had written lines drenched in despair. Chopin once admitted, "I wish I could throw off the thoughts which poison my happiness, but I take a kind of pleasure in indulging them." Doesn't that sound exactly like something Val Kilmer's Doc would whisper? Half a smirk hiding the agony beneath. Chopin died in 1849, just 2 years before Holliday was even born. And yet, through fate or poetry, their lives became intertwined. Two brilliant but doomed men linked by genius, sorrow, and the same disease that would claim them both. Tombstone has plenty of Hollywood Western Easter eggs. Tombstone isn't just a Western, it's a love letter to Westerns. The filmmakers weren't content with simply retelling history. They wove in tributes that any sharp-eyed fan of the genre would recognize. For one, they slipped a piece of the Earp bloodline right into the story. Wyatt Earp's real-life fifth cousin actually appears in the film, stepping into the role of Billy Claiborne. That's not just casting, that's legacy folded directly onto the screen. Then, there's the voice guiding us through the story. The film's narrator isn't just anyone. It's Hollywood legend Robert Mitchum, a man whose voice carried the weight of decades of movie toughness. Hearing him sets the tone before the first gun is drawn. The Easter eggs don't stop there. The cast itself is peppered with Western royalty. Harry Carey Jr., who worked alongside John Wayne, Buck Taylor, familiar to anyone who grew up watching Gunsmoke, and the towering Charlton Heston, whose very presence feels larger than life. And it didn't end with Tombstone. Paula Malcolmson and the late Powers Booth would later saddle up again in HBO's Deadwood, another landmark of the genre. So, while Tombstone gave audiences gunfights and unforgettable lines, it also gave a wink to Hollywood's Western past and a nod to its future. The real Tombstone that was in the movie. Early in Tombstone, the camera lingers on a headstone with an epitaph so sharp it feels like a Halloween prop. Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a .44. No less, no more. It sounds too cheeky, too perfect to be real. But here's the twist. It is real. That exact inscription sits on a grave in Tombstone, Arizona, marking the resting place of a man who crossed paths with the wrong gun. It's one of those pieces of Old West folklore that feels written for the movies, but history beat Hollywood to it. Only the stone you see in the film isn't the real one. That shot was filmed at Knott's Berry Farm in Southern California in the park's Wild West section, where a replica of the Lester Moore grave sits tucked among the attractions. Hollywood magic layered over real Wild West history. Kurt Russell reportedly still has piles of unseen footage from the shoot. Footage fans have been clamoring for in a definitive director's cut. Will we ever get it? No one knows. But until then, all we can do is keep quoting the version we have, and let's be honest, the one we've loved enough to make Tombstone a legend. 17 crew members either quit or were fired after the demanding Cosmatos took over as director. When Kevin Jarre was pushed out of Tombstone, the set didn't just change hands, it changed energy. George P. Cosmatos stepped in with a heavy hand and a no-nonsense style that immediately shook things up. Kurt Russell quietly worked behind the curtain, putting together daily shot lists. But on the ground, Cosmatos ruled the set like a general. One of his first calls: scrap almost everything Jarre had already shot. A full month of work was tossed aside and Cosmatos essentially started over. He brought in the explosive Mexican wedding massacre to kick the film off and stacked on more action at the climax to seal the deal. Bigger, louder, bloodier. That was his vision. But that vision came at a cost. His bossy approach rubbed the crew the wrong way, and the tension boiled over. Reports say as many as 17 crew members either walked off or were fired during production. Production designer Catherine Hardwicke remembered it well, describing Cosmatos as demanding, relentless, and unafraid to push people to the edge. Some thrived on the intensity. Others flat out freaked out. Nobody felt the clash harder than cinematographer William Fraker. He quit not once, not twice, but 3 separate times during filming. The feud between him and Cosmatos got so nasty they even rammed golf carts into each other in a behind-the-scenes showdown that sounds like something out of a parody western. And yet Fraker stayed. Producer James Jacks pulled him back each time, reminding him that this wasn't just another movie. It was Tombstone. Fraker later admitted he endured the chaos because, despite everything, the footage looked incredible. In his own words, "If I wasn't happy with what was on the screen, it would be entirely different. But I think we have a movie." Sam Elliott hated Kurt Russell's script changes. Kurt Russell wasn't just carrying the weight of Wyatt Earp on his shoulders. He was carrying the whole movie. When he stepped into the quiet role of ghost director, one of his toughest calls was slashing nearly 30 pages from Kevin Jarre's original script. Those cuts weren't random. Russell and producer James Jacks wanted to sharpen the story's focus, zeroing in on the bond between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. For Russell, that relationship wasn't just a side story. It was the beating heart of the film. He later described Wyatt and Doc as one of the great love affairs of all time between 2 men, calling it strange, violent, and unspoken, but also deep and fiercely loyal. It was about brotherhood, sacrifice, and the kind of love that doesn't need words to be understood. But not everyone agreed with the changes. Sam Elliott, who brought the iron-backed Virgil Earp to life, openly admitted he wasn't a fan of the final rewrite. He believed the original script had been one of the best he'd ever read, and the cuts stripped away too much. In Elliott's view, removing those 29 pages gutted the connective tissue, the character development, and the little details that gave the story its soul. If that had been the script handed to him at the start, he admitted he might not have even signed on. It was a clash of visions. Russell chasing emotional intensity between Wyatt and Doc, and Elliott longing for the fuller, layered epic Jarre had written. And somewhere in that middle ground, Tombstone was born. The version we know today, leaner, faster, and destined for cult classic status. What is that one Tombstone revelation that you never knew until now? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.